Hey everyone, I've been playing Outriders non-stop since Thursday, and while I will admit that it's rough in some aspects, it's also been quite an enjoyable ride. And because of that, on today's content, we are gonna go over an endgame Technomancer build. And while yes, this is certainly yet another Blighted rounds character, we are gonna focus on the status effect Ash instead of Freeze. And for that, we are gonna apply Ash through the use of a mod on our weapon. We are doing this because Ash has both the benefits of holding enemies in place like Freeze, while also getting thick damage bonuses from armor mods. Plus, we are not using any Freeze focused nodes in the tree, so might as well ditch it completely. Having said that, this build is heavily focused around critical hits, both to sustain ammunition and also to deal the big fat DPS, as you'll see from the gameplay. Anyways, we also use some legendary modifiers, but all of the gear is purple. While I'm still hunting for an actual legendary set to start brainstorming other build ideas, we are gonna make use of two legendary mods on this one. One of those mods is inside a legendary that is sold by Tiago in the endgame area, but the other one is going to require some RNG, though it's nothing you can't replace until you can find that mod. Finally, the way I've built this character should allow you to solo stuff, as you'll see from the gameplay where I am soloing challenge tier 14, while also handling tier 15 in groups without much issue. But I would recommend doing humanoid focused expeditions, since the ones with animals tend to get a bit hectic, especially those adult Perforios. But yeah, with all of that said, hey, if you enjoyed tonight's content, be sure to subscribe to the channel, otherwise a rating and a comment are always appreciated. So now let us talk about building ourselves a literal poison headshot happy Gorgon. Alright then, first things first, the skills. We are gonna use Fixing Wave as a no crap button to get a chunky heal when stuff gets too hectic. Blighted Turret, which is only here to distract enemies but also to trigger Empowering Antenna on the skill tree. And finally, the backbone of all Technomancers, Blighted rounds. Get used to listening to the beautiful sound they make because you're gonna have them up 90% of the time. And it's in your best interest to do so, since they greatly increase our damage output. Alright, so now for the gear, we're gonna start with the weapon. I personally enjoy burst fire weapons in this game, like SMGs, assault rifles or double guns. Any of those three is fine. LMGs work too, but if you want to use one of those, I recommend the variant that has increased fire rate. Remember that all items come with attributes on them, and in this case on our weapon we greatly benefit from armor pierce, status effect or crit damage, so make sure that you get some of those in your weapon. And don't forget to increase them through Dr. Sahiri. However, when it comes to the mods, we need Brain Eater as a natural occurring mod on this one, so that we can craft ultimate Ashen Bullets into the other slot. By landing headshots or critical hits against enemies, we sustain both our damage and our Blighted rounds magazines. Ultimate Ashen Bullets comes from the Wicker, which is sold by Tiago to Technomancers in the endgame area. But if you cannot get that modifier, feel free to use tier 2 Ashen Bullets until you can. Now, before we talk about the armor, there are some attributes to hunt for. Things like max health, bonus firepower, cooldown reduction and status power. Especially this last one, status power, which is going to increase the effect of vulnerable, ash and toxic, you know, for more damage and quality of life. So keep an eye out for item bases with these attributes and don't forget to increase them again through Dr. Sahiri. Now here's where the fun begins. As a Technomancer, Blighted rounds are 90% of our build. So to get the most out of them, we want the modifiers Critical Analysis for some crit damage while using Blighted rounds, Toxic Lead to receive ammunition from killing enemies affected by Toxic, Radical Therapy to deal 15% more damage against enemies afflicted by Toxic, and Spare Mag to have an extra magazine of Blighted rounds before it enters cooldown. It doesn't really matter where you get those mods, but we absolutely need them on our gear. However, we are also using Ash to immobilize enemies, in this case Ultimate Ashen Bullets, which are gonna help us keep them petrified in place at all times, which in turn is gonna help us trivialize a lot of content, but we also want damage out of Ash, which is why you need the next set of mods. Ashen Boost to increase the damage against enemies afflicted with Ash, and Ash Cleaner to deal extra crit damage to enemies afflicted with Ash. This is why we cannot afford to miss headshots or crits, as we gain a hefty amount of damage against enemies petrified by Ash. And we also use some extra filler modifiers. Crit Stack to build up an stacking effect that will boost anomaly and firepower bonuses, and we want this one for the firepower bonus, since the bulk of our damage lies on the headshot DPS. Plus, the goal of the build is to deal crits most of the time, so it kinda makes sense to have this one. Damage Absorber, which is gonna give us a hefty chunk of armor and resistance. I like this one to soak a little bit of damage, but you can swap it for any other one you want. Dum Dum Bullets, which increases the assault weapon damage. This applies to LMGs, double guns, SMGs and assault rifles, our weapons of choice. And finally, the other legendary modifier, Captain Hunter, to deal big damage against elites. Elites being enemies with a skull on the map. You know, the assholes that you gotta keep an eye out for. However, I am certain that not everyone is gonna have this mod. I'm pretty sure I got them from the Cannonball Gauntlets, but don't quote me on that. And I got those gauntlets after completing a questline, so I do believe that they are a random drop in that regard. But if you cannot get it, feel free to use any other defense or damage focused mod, or a dot in the case that you cannot force useful stuff. Moving on to the skill tree, we are gonna begin on the middle tree, taking life, resistance, more life, exposing toxin to inflict vulnerable on enemies under the toxic status, marked for execution to increase the effect of vulnerable, and some crit. Then we are gonna grab armor, more life, wipeout to deal extra damage against weak enemies, blur screen to increase the health regen threshold, weapon damage, damage against enemies under toxic, more weapon damage, assault master to increase LMG, assault rifle, SMG or double gun damage, more assault weapon damage, some armor pierce, a useless node, UT-14 clips to increase magazine size, more damage against enemies under toxic, and empowering antenna to get a damage boost whenever blighted rounds or blighted turret are casted, for 10 seconds. Now, before we wrap up this build, two things. A, we did not grab any freeze node, so any freeze we will deal is useless. This also applies to the skills that we use. And second, Blighted Turret has a short cooldown that goes even lower with some cooldown reduction attributes. Since we get a hefty damage boost thanks to empowering antenna and we are under Blighted rounds 90% of the time, we gotta spam that Blighted Turret as often as possible to get that crispy damage boost. Especially when elites are on screen and we wanna get rid of them fast. But yeah, that's gonna be it for the important stuff. So as some closing thoughts on this character, the build handles itself quite nicely on challenge tier 14 solo expeditions, as you've seen from the gameplay. But I've also been able to hit gold rating on tier 15 expeditions, granted while teaming up with randoms. Though I did find myself doing the most damage at the end of tier 15 expeditions. The gameplay is actually quite defensive as we are not up on the enemy's face. By petrifying anything thanks to Ash rounds, we get to avoid danger rather often. However, the bulk of our damage relies on our ability to deal critical hits. In most cases this means headshots. This allows us to sustain our ammunition and our damage, so the build is going to require accuracy. Finally, I don't recommend any legendaries for this build, because that will imply removing their special modifiers to accommodate Ash rounds or Brain Eater. Plus, purple gear does just fine. Especially right now where the game is rather fresh and not everyone has every leggy or mod available to them. Anyways, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching tonight's video. Feel free to comment any change or upgrade you might have about the character, and if you found it useful, don't forget to subscribe. More Outriders content soon. In the meantime, I leave you with some gameplay. Take care, have a nice start to your week, and peace out.